This episode of the Accounting Insiders podcast is brought to you in part by Xero. Xero is a powerful cloud accounting software that improves efficiencies across your practice. With all client data stored on a single unified ledger, you and your clients can easily access and collaborate on the same set of books. Xero's advisor tools and automation solutions reduce time-consuming manual tasks and put data entry on autopilot. Work faster and more efficiently than ever before with Xero. Visit xero.com/accounting insiders to learn more. All right, hello and welcome to another episode of the Accounting Insiders podcast. My name is Gary DeHart. I'm the publisher of Insightful Accountant and the host for the Accounting Insiders podcast. And today I have Christine Gervais, who is a CPA doctoral candidate. We're going to keep throwing that one in there because that is
I appreciate that.
Very impressive to me that, again, for multiple reasons, primarily because I wasn't a very good student, secondarily because I can't imagine being in school that long, and third, I certainly cannot imagine working towards a doctorate in accounting. It's in accounting, right?
It's in accounting, yes.
And no offense to anyone who should be listening to this, because you should all be accountants, but that just is, yeah, not a burden I'd be willing to bear.
Yeah, I think most accountants aren't getting PhDs in accounting either, so it's okay.
Yeah, and there's a good reason. So what we're doing here, so Christine is part of, Christine writes a lot for Insightful Accountant, primarily in our tax side. She hosts our TPN Tax Talks webinar on I think it's every other month. And now she's also producing content for us in our premium area, which is called Be Insightful. And so we wanted to just have her on to kind of touch base on her last session that she did. And if you don't know, so the premium content offering, basically we have a webinar on a topic, and then we'll do a workshop after that, typically 1 to 2 hours within a day. Sometimes they go a week later, but it's an opportunity for the attendee, the member, to spend some one-on-one or small group time with the subject matter expert, and in this case, Christine, to either go over what she talked about in the webinar, or if there's time and you have another issue, you can kind of pick her brain about whatever that issue may be. So in this podcast, we're going to go kind of high level over the last session that you did, which I think was all of yesterday. And so we're just going to touch on some of the key points of that, which will kind of take us to implementation. And I think, as we were talking in the green room, it's a little bit, we're a very small practice focused and small, like for me, I'm a small business. Our biggest challenge can be implementation. I can sit through 100 webinars and training sessions and be told all the things to do, but then what? Then how do I implement? And so you built out a white paper with a matrix that kind of condenses that white paper down, and then you did this presentation yesterday. So we're going to, again, high level on that. So I've done a lot of talking. So I want to, again, thank you for being here. And so one of the key things, like the table of contents, I think out of the white paper, you talked about key technology areas for tax practice. And those areas, tax prep software, document management systems, practice management solutions, client portals, data analytics tools, cloud computing solutions, i.e. accounting, and cybersecurity tools. Rather than deep dive all of those, let's look at kind of what I think are three pretty key, well, they're all key, but three of them that really stand out to me: document management systems. So what am I looking for in a document management system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I think makes this maybe even more critical from a small practice or a small business perspective, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday in that longer webinar that we did, is what inevitably ends up happening in these smaller practices is we're, as the small business owner, wearing all the hats, right? Like, so anybody who is operating as the owner or manager in one of these smaller practices has had this experience of, I'm supposed to be reviewing and I'm supposed to be selling to prospective new clients and I'm supposed to be doing the work. And then I have this administrative responsibility of choosing technology and writing process and procedure for the rest of the practice at the same time. So what happens sometimes is a lot of things can become fires really quickly, as opposed to us having the time to sit down and have foresight to plan out, hey, as we grow, what's the best solution for us? And instead, we just end up sort of like layering band-aid onto a problem and then band-aid onto a problem and then band-aid onto a problem. So with tech stack, what ends up happening is that we might be very well intentioned to be technology focused in our practice, but if we're not taking the time to have that holistic view of like, what do I actually need versus what do I not need? Like, what's the right fit for me? And what's actually going to solve the problems within my practice, is we can end up with duplication in our software that doesn't make sense. We can end up paying for, two pieces of software that are doing the same thing. We can just end up with a solution overall that isn't a good fit for us. And document management is one place where I think that it's really easy for that to happen, because there's so many solutions out there. There's a lot of them that are really inexpensive at the, kind of ground level. And so we go with those less expensive options because they make the most sense to us at the time. But they might not make sense later on. And this kind of gets layered into, our conversation around client portals and things like that, ease of access, ease of use. So to answer your question, I definitely think that you're looking at the client perspective of document management. How easy is it for your clients to send you documents and then retrieve documents that you've sent to them? All of us have this issue. We talked about it yesterday in that webinar. Like, communication is eating up a lot of our time. And when tax practitioners specifically say communication is eating up a lot of our time, it's document collection. That's what it really is sending what our clients need out to them, and having them be able to access it 24/7, so that every time our client is trying to go get a home equity line, they're not calling us and interrupting our day to ask for the last 2 years worth of tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
So document management isn't just internal, it's external from that perspective too. And, how do you build in time savings so that things are easily accessible to your clients? But how do I also make sure that our clients are the most easily able to send us information? We don't want to be spending time constantly having to send reminders, things like that. How do they easily send us information? And then security is a really big thing that you need to look for as well. So you're looking for something that's going to help drive efficiency in that back and forth communication piece. And you're also looking for something that is going to provide secure file sharing. And you have to be really careful too. One thing that I think is lost on a lot of people is that if you're using the free version of something, like if you're a really small practice and you're using the free version of, any of these document sharing systems, the fine print of that may be that you don't have security coverage, that if there's some type of breach because you're not on a paid subscription, you might not have any type of liability coverage if something goes wrong with that document sharing software. So that's something to understand too, is that in this particular case, the lowest price point might not always be the best option. So we want to look at, are we securely protecting that information, and are we also housing it in a way that it's easily accessible and it's going to actually be an efficient tool for us?
Then that gets into the WISP, which we're not even going to get into, right? So, so you mentioned practice management and you mentioned client portals. So document management, practice management, client portals. To me, that should be a one-stop shop.
It is in some cases.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, so if the listeners want to take the opportunity to go download the matrix that we put together for these, one of the great things about the matrix is that it lists options of technology that would fit in a small firm environment, medium firm environment, and large firm environment for each of these categories of their practice. Granted, they're just suggestions, but some of the more medium firm options are those one-stop shop options. They're your TaxDome, your Carbon, your Canopy. And those might be cost prohibitive for a smaller practice, but you do have to, like I said, you have to look at, are you paying for 3 subscriptions to all do something different for you with probably a little bit of overlap? is the price point similar to something that's going to give you all three of those client portal, practice management, and document management in one? That's an opportunity to look at technology driving some efficiency in your practice.
And it's funny, as you were talking about the storage, I was sitting there thinking, okay, where do I have stuff stored? I have, well,
Everywhere.
we use 365, so got
Yep.
OneDrive. Some of our contractors use Google, so getting Google Drive, and those are probably, well, Google's probably not covered under any kind of license, um, or
Yep.
insurance perspective.
Yeah.
We have Dropbox. I have Box.
Yep.
We use HubSpot. And so
Yep.
HubSpot, now we're starting to put files there. So that's five right there. And I'm sure I'm missing at least one. Um, and that's not good, right? It's not efficient. It's where's that document? Oh, I have to find it. Oh, and then actually my hard drive too. Don't forget about that.
Right. That's also where like a practice management tool might be able to help you, because some of these practice management tools are designed for syncing and integration into almost all of the different pieces that you just talked about, right? So if a small practice has sort of created that situation that you just described, well, I use Google to share docs with my clients, but then I use Box internally to share my tax returns, and then I have something else that holds maybe I use OneDrive to hold my internal files. That's a great thing. Now you can start to narrow down the pool of tech stack that might be a good fit for you. Go look for practice management software that has syncing capability with all three. So then from a managing the practice standpoint, you're able to bring all three of those different sources into that one practice management bucket for you. So at least from your internal perspective, you're starting to cut down on where do I need to go to find the information I'm looking for.
And then share that with people on your team if you have a
Yes.
team. This is how we do it. This is the process.
Yes.
Here's people, process, technology. Here's the process that we need to follow. And then you have to follow up and make sure it's followed, but that's a whole other issue. But the last one that was on your list, so you had seven total. Cybersecurity.
Mm,
So in the prep discussion for this, you know, I don't know anything about cybersecurity. I just know I need it. I know I
yep.
have a problem. I know it's a requirement. But how do I evaluate? I mean, I'm not qualified to evaluate. So what do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And I will be totally candid and say that I know that I'm not qualified to evaluate cybersecurity either. So this is an area that as tax practice owners, managers, especially, this is a big responsibility that's on our shoulders, because we are receiving and exchanging so much information digitally now. And that information is protected information of our clients. We're storing birth dates, social security numbers, addresses, credit card numbers in a lot of cases. And so there is this big responsibility for being compliant with that information. So two things. I mean, I always recommend that you have a conversation with your insurance broker about your cybersecurity insurance, probably every year. Never hurts to review the policies that you have in place. I always recommend that you have an IT team on board that understands your cybersecurity a lot better than maybe we would, because I'm an accountant. I'm not an IT expert. So you
Right.
need to have some overhead for those two things. But when you're looking at a piece of software, I mean, one, if you have a great IT team in place, they should be able to help you evaluate some of your technology from that cybersecurity perspective, or at least tell you what some of the fine print means on one of those technology contracts before you kind of, jump into there. So you really want to have a good partner from that perspective that's giving you some advice. Obviously the basics you want to be looking at, is there multi-factor authentication on everything that we're using? So you should never be implementing any piece of technology that doesn't have the two-factor authentication. And we all had to put our risk plans into place last year, our written information security plans. So whether or not that became, a piece of living, breathing documentation that your firm uses, or whether or not that became something that is maybe still sitting on the shelf since you wrote at the end of last year, pull it out and look at it. And there should be some things that should indicate to you what are you also looking for in the software that you're using. You know, regular changing to passwords, automatic. That should be automatically built in that these pieces of technology are going to force you to change your password every once in a while. It's going to have the two-factor authentication. That's where you can get into a little bit of a struggle in a small firm too, that you don't want to be sharing users. Like, so a lot of times you'll see that where there's only one user login because we only want to pay for one seat and then you're sharing that. That cuts down on your security. So if that's the situation, you want to be looking at, what's the price point for me to have an appropriate number of seats in the technology that I'm using. But it always helps to start with the experts. As tax practices, we absolutely have to have a strong IT team in place.
Yes, and that's a whole other issue, right? Because now I have to pay for that. Um,
Yes.
and I have to, or if it's outsourced, I have to identify the right company
Yes,
or
which
team.
a
And
lot of the times it is outsourced, especially in a small practice. You're not going to have that full-time, IT officer per se on board. And there's some great outsourcing options, but yeah, you want to look for somebody that has experience with, professional services at least. If you can't find somebody that has worked with an accounting office before, somebody that has worked with like medical offices or lawyers' offices that are familiar with that sort of similar level of client information security, that
yeah,
might be a good fit as well.
okay, great. So let's pivot over to in your presentation yesterday, you talked about, and I keep looking at these other screens. That's why I'm looking up, not like, talking to anybody. You talked about implementation next steps, and it was assess, decide, plan, and then roll out. Um, do you, is there a rule of thumb on like how much time that's going to take? I mean, to do an assessment or a decision process, planning rollout. I mean, what would you recommend somebody plan to carve out there?
Yeah, great question. It sort of depends on what area of the practice we're looking at. Like it might be easier for you to roll out, believe it or not, it might be easier for you to roll out a tax preparation software change between now and the end of the year versus a document management system change. Because if you're going to do a document management system change, you need an entire plan as to how your existing documentation is rolling over. How are you getting your clients access to everything? Is your file structure going to stay the same? Is it not? Backing everything up. Whereas if you're going to change over to a new tax prep software, it's probably as simple as just bringing in your existing database and then training your team on what's different in the new piece of software. So the answer is it depends. It depends on
Yeah.
how heavy the lift is, and what it is that you're implementing. It always is going to take longer than you think that it is. It's like a construction project where if you think that you're going to implement this in 2 months, it's probably going to be at least 4. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind, that never have I ever seen this go exactly according to what the plan is. The plan is there to kind of keep the guardrails in place, but you have to anticipate that there is going to be some level of unexpected that happens, that's
Yep.
going to slow down your timeline a little bit. So give yourself more grace in the plan than you really think that you need. You don't want to back it up so that it's so tight that if one thing goes wrong, it throws off the whole plan. But in most cases, I really think that you're looking at probably at least 90 days is the fastest implementation that you can do in
Okay.
terms of looking at demos, making a decision, implementing the software, testing it, and then actually getting your team utilizing it long enough that you start to see some efficiency.
Right. And I think the testing it part is critical, right? I
It is
mean, because the sales guy is going to tell you what the sales guy is going to tell you. Not saying that
100%.
salespeople aren't 100% correct all the time. Being one, I can talk about salespeople, but um, but they also have a goal that they need to hit, right? And there
Right.
may be things that they either don't share or that they minimize or
They're also
just
just
gloss
not going to
over,
see all of your use cases. I mean, that's
right?
what it is too, is that the sales team is just not always going to have the detail to know what all of your use cases look like. So inevitably, you will have something come up on the back end after you've implemented where you're going to need some support to say, I'm not sure how to work through this and how to do it from a best practices standpoint. This is something that I think a lot of practitioners miss the boat on too, is we implement software and then we never go back to actually ask support, hey, I ran into this. What is your recommended best practice for dealing with
Mm,
it? And you should really be leaning on the support of your technology to tell you the answers to those questions.
great. All right, so we're going to bounce over to next steps, and this too was part of your presentation, but it references the white paper and the matrix. And so, kind of your next steps, say, get started. It's October the 25th, day we're
Mm,
recording this, so there's still some time to make some
yes.
change here at the year end. So you had tools, and your tool was download the software matrix and print out the key slides.
Yep.
And so again, it's a premium content offering, but you can get into that offering at blog.insightfulaccountant.com. And then goals, you say to identify clear goals for the technology adoption, and then set a timeline for evaluating solutions, which we were just talking about. And then timeline, certainly you don't want to implement it in tax season, implement before, or if you just get, if you get into it and you're like, I can't do this, you're going to have to wait. I mean, and I don't think that's any kind of aha moment for anyone, but nobody wants to implement any of this in tax season, right?
Yeah, and most of it is training, not necessarily that the software wouldn't be, really great to have available to us, but you really want time to make sure that if you're implementing something that you're utilizing it to the highest extent possible. And my experience is that if you rush to implement something, especially before busy season, what inevitably happens during busy season is we're not taking the time to really do that best practices and training. And you can kind of like create a mess with the new version of whatever technology that you implemented. And that's just kind of a silly waste of time and resources. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're kind of coming up right on that 90-day mark because I think most practices can handle, really up until the end of January, a little bit of practice in terms of something new, but really you're coming up on a tight cutoff. Anything that you should be implementing at this point should be small change implementation.
Okay. And then, so we're going to wrap up. And I don't know if you can hear in the background. I don't know if these things are doing the noise canceling or not, but my dog is back there, has been whining to go out now for
Oh
about
no.
15 minutes. And, she's been in and out, in and out. I know you're a dog fan, but if you do hear that, that's what it is. It's not a small child or anything that's needing attention. It's worse than any small child. It's a dog. And so we're going to wrap up with, this is all great information, and I'm going to go and I'm going to download, join the program. I'm going to download the white paper, download the matrix, review the webinar slides or the recording. But how do I cut through the clutter? Because this is a
Mm,
lot of information.
mhm,
Again, as we talked about on the front end, most are small firms. Most don't have an IT person that's going to do this evaluation for us. How do I
mhm.
cut through the clutter, or how do I narrow down kind of that evaluation process so that I'm
Yeah.
not looking at 10 things, maybe I'm looking at two things?
Sure, absolutely. Great question. So that's sort of the point of the matrix. And one of the things that we said yesterday in the webinar is that you really don't want to be looking at more than one of these practice areas at a time. So if your primary concern going into tax season is I have to figure out how to spend less time in the communication cycle, and that's not to mean to cut down on your quality communication with your clients. It's meant to cut down on the quantity of non-quality communication, mostly around document collection and the constant pick up and put down of something that you're trying to finish, a tax return. So if that's the primary concern, looking at that matrix, you can say, okay, maybe client portal or practice management software are the only two pieces that I should be looking at right now, because maybe there's a solution in one of those two things that's going to specifically address my communication issue, which is the only thing I'm trying to solve for this upcoming tax season. We can look at the rest later. So then I'm going to say, all right, well, there's my client portal options. There's a column for suggestions for small firms, medium firms, large firms. I don't need to look at the large firms. I'm not a large firm, practice. And so I'm just going to start in the small firm bucket. There's only 3 suggestions in there. And maybe you look at one and from a price point perspective or from just a scalability perspective, you can eliminate it right away. And now you're down to your 2 choices. So instead of you just Google searching and going, I got to schedule 10 demos or read all of these websites, you can utilize that matrix to sort of do process of elimination so that you're getting down to not more than 2 or 3 to try to help you make a faster decision.
Great. All right. Are you guys, this really will be the last question. Are you evaluating anything now for your firm for next year?
Yeah.
Or are you happy with what you have?
No, so we are looking to implement Stanford Tax, which I talked about yesterday. We're going to do that before tax season starts to specifically address that communication piece, and try to help drive some efficiencies with our document collection and our organizers this year.
There you go. All right. Well, Christine, thank you so much. Certainly appreciate your time on this. And again, if you have interest in the white paper, the recordings of what we've referred to, again, go to blog.insightfulaccountant.com. You'll see a button up in the top right that says premium content or premium program. Click that, go through the process and join, and then you'll have access to Christine's resources as well as all the other resources we've produced, which amounts to about typically about 3 webinars a month. Plus, Merv has done some app comparisons. He just did an ERP comparison and presentation yesterday, which was like, when you look at it, it's like hurts my head. Hurts my head almost as much as thinking about a doctorate in accounting, but not quite as much. So again, thank you so much. Blog.insightfulaccountant.com. Join that program to be insightful. Thank you, Christine.